Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And before we get started today, the one thing I just wanted to share with everybody again is the fact that Life Science Success won an award from FeedSpot as the top life science podcast, and so I feel honored with regards to that, and really appreciate the fact, one, that there are great fans of the show and people that are listening, but secondly, that there are great guests like our guest today. And so I'm going to try and bring in John. We were having a little bit of technical difficulty right as we got started here, so I might have to click a couple of buttons as I do an introduction for John. So everybody just bear with me for 1 second if he happens to not be there. But in this episode of the Life Science Success podcast, my guest is John Schmitt. He's a military veteran, an entrepreneur, and co-founder and CEO of iXpressGenes, who leverages innovative RNA biomarker technologies to revolutionize trauma screening in healthcare. And so with that, welcome, John. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And I've got your audio. Everything's perfect. Look at that.
All
Look
right.
at that.
Perfect.
Right as we were starting the countdown timer, I happened to lose John, and I was like, "Well, let's see how this goes," because an interview with myself would not be as nearly as entertaining as one with you. And so John, would you mind just telling us a little bit about what was your journey to coming to biotechnology of all places and trauma care?
Yes, I grew up in the San Francisco East Bay, and I got a degree in biology, and I needed some help paying for college, so I actually joined the Army. Was this is pre 9/11, and so I was a helicopter pilot, and then 9/11 kicks off, and I spent the next 10 years kind of in and out of training for deployments and deployments, so a couple tours to Iraq. After that season, I actually went and got a degree in microbiology and immunology. And frankly, I didn't even know how to spell immunology. I just needed to get a master's so that the Army would send me to go teach at West Point. I never thought I would use that degree, but obviously, as we'll kind of dive into, it was really, really critical time for me to to learn a skill that I would use later. Um, and then, we moved to Huntsville, Alabama. I spent the last 10 years in weapon system development, mostly in aviation and missile. And that was kind of a very unique situation. I had a couple of jobs where I got to see really basic research and really the whole life cycle, all the way across from basic research to large scale production of weapon systems. And so, for me, when I got out of the military, I did want to kind of transition out of defense. And I have such a passion for life science. And, as someone who, is a two-tour combat vet who suffered from PTSD myself, it was not just saw this incredible opportunity to help others avoid, hopefully avoid the suffering that I had. And of course, we've all lost a lot of friends over the years, and it's a huge problem. It's only getting worse, and it's a huge honor to be part of it in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear. I mean, I'm really curious though too to hear. Do you ever fly a helicopter now?
Oh no, no, no. Yeah, I haven't flown since I think 2009 was my last actual flight. So it's I can't even really consider myself a pilot anymore, honestly.
That's funny. Yeah, I figured once it was in your blood, you wouldn't be able to get it out. Would figure that you'd always want to fly something.
It actually got to be a lot like a job. So I was actually as a maintenance test pilot as well, and so fixing airplanes and trying not to keep them in the air it gets a little stressful over time. And so for me, I was okay giving it up. It was I was not one of those kids that was like, gee, I always wanted to fly and finally got to live my dream. It was something I really really enjoyed, but man, it was time to transition to something else.
Yeah, the one funny story is the one thing that completely killed the idea of my joining the military was so Blackhawks were brand new whenever I was in high school. They were fairly new helicopters. They were extremely cool. All the technology that was in them was very cutting edge for like where I could think of where we were at that point in time. And so I was talking to a recruiter about, hey, look, that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to work on the weapon system on a Blackhawk. That's what I would. I mean, I would absolutely love to do that. And So it comes time to actually, find an MOS for me and like figure out exactly where what I would apply for or whatever. And he comes up with tank turret mechanic. And I'm like, that's not the weapon system
It's
on
not
my
it.
Blackhawk. Sorry, I could only see like me running across the battlefield with a some form of a toolkit strapped to my back. And I could see somebody thinking that that would be fun for Don Davis to go do. So I just decided, nope, I'll go the other route and stay away from the military. Then it's
Oh,
fine.
that's great.
But
That's funny.
how did your experience with the Black Hawk and the Army, really influence your career and your path and your interest though?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, there was absolutely nobody, including myself, that ever thought I would join the military. But I always had, this sense of this just sense of service to others. My personal mission statement, I realized much older, was really just to serve humanity and inspire unconventional thought. And I just had this like insatiable, professional curiosity. And so you kind of look at my very non-traditional path in the military, but was able to take, multiple different positions and jobs that kind of didn't really make sense for somebody on a straight path. Um, but I kind of saw it as just an opportunity, and the military is just a really fascinating leadership laboratory, right? I don't know of another profession where you give young men and women such incredible responsibility, and the training to execute on it. You have an opportunity and to make a lot of mistakes, right? And certainly, I made a lot of mistakes. Um, but if you give your soldiers the opportunity to give you feedback, they are the best feedback, and that's where you learn. Even the brutal feedback is an undeniable gift. So, I learned kind of in that time in the military and leading soldiers was just that my style is really just to lead through transparency, predictability, and vulnerability, and to be able to create really effective teams that are mission driven. I love it so much, and to be able to do that now, in my professional life, to build lasting teams and to build organizations that make lasting change. I mean, it's been a complete gift, and I do owe it to the experience. I certainly would never downplay the how grateful I am for that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I also have seen a lot of people, make the transition, and it's not always easy to take like what you do in the military and translate that back, to civilian life. But at the same time, understanding kind of the base of what it is that you're getting. Whenever you get somebody that was in the military, that led people, that held a variety of roles, that had all these great experiences, I think is important too.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So you've held various roles yourself, from combat leader to assistant professor at West Point. How have these diverse experiences shaped your approach to leadership and innovation?
Um, when I was a kid, I remember my good friends, we were sitting on a curb, drinking coffee somewhere, and he said one of the most profound things that just kind of, affected how I approach life, which was, there's no growth in comfort. And every role that I've ever taken was always kind of like I was told, hey, don't do that, it's going to ruin your career or whatever. And but I was always like, I have just a insatiable curiosity for things and want to make it better. And so I have such gratitude for that diversity. And I guess when I see gaps and problem sets in a way. I mean, yeah, I because of how I grew up and where I grew up in the time frame and the music scene, like I have a pretty strange punk rock sense of justice. So, I always wanted to contribute to solving these problems and these gaps to make it right and make sure that I guess that's what makes me a sucker for entrepreneurship, right? Is finding a problem set and wanting to solve it. And in the military, like I mentioned, kind of the leadership laboratory aspects of it is when you see those gaps, you have people and resources and a motivation to make things better, and you truly can, if you have the right leadership top cover to do it. Just kind of like an example was, when I was teaching at West Point, I thought I was going there to teach biology. I didn't realize I was going to teach their chemistry. I didn't even like chemistry. And I'm like, I don't, I'm going to have to learn with these students. Like, you realize that, right? Um, and I, at the time, these were all young men and women who I all had to take chemistry, and every one of them knew that they were going in harm's way. This was, the peak of the Afghan and Iraq wars, and I thought it was such a disservice, to give these people, who less than 2% of them were ever going to be a life science major or contribute in life sciences, to force them through this like rote memorization process, and kind of almost it just seemed not not really beneficial. So, they actually made me the course director, and I had an opportunity to just rebuild that curriculum in a way that was really about problem solving, critical thinking, and scientific literacy. And I figured that would be a much better way to use that year with these young men and women who were going to go lead, the children of America, in combat. Just that's the kind of gap that I was able to identify and see. And then being in the military, having the freedom and the support to go just change things disruptively, um, it, it's a gift. It was a gift.
Yeah, somebody had said there was a quote that I heard earlier today. I listen a lot while I'm working on other things, and I sort of, in passing heard this quote, and I was like, that actually is pretty profound. But it was like the quote goes something like, "Theory sucks, and application and example is where the next level of education is coming." And I was like, that that's so
Mm,
true. But also the other piece that I would pick apart that you just said was the one thing that I think is missing in a lot of the people who get their news from scrolling on their phone, or trying to figure out the world through sort of watching what an algorithm feeds them in social media, is critical thinking. And
mm.
there was somebody recently, pretty high level, that was seen like saying, "Hey, look, I get my news through a feed, by scrolling." And I was like, time out though, because all of that is shaped for you by a computer somewhere. And if you're not using your critical brain to go, but is this real? Is this reality? I can't think of any skill more profound right now than for everybody to have than critical thinking. Is just my my current
Yeah,
belief.
and just to acknowledge that statement is it's diametrically opposed, motivations, right? You're motivated for, consuming information. That feed is motivated to sell you products, right? So there's a mismatch of unless you have that curiosity and the ability to critically think about what you're consuming. I'm with you.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about iXpressGenes. So what motivated you to co-found iXpressGenes, and also, whenever you think about your education and background, how does it help you in terms of contributing in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis now?
Yeah. So let me kind of start with kind of the origin story, because I think it's really kind of important. So our founder, Dr. Joe Ng, professor at University of Alabama Huntsville, they were in just a staff meeting like any other day, and colleague pulls out a handgun and murders three people brutally in front of them.
Wow.
And from that horrible tragedy and experience, Joe noticed this spectrum of resilience among his peers and even in himself, and he just said there has to be some sort of immunological component to trauma. We in the West, we tend to separate our brain from the body, like they're not attached. And he just knew that there had to be something there. So he did a small study with Alabama National Guard, and spoiler alert, it was accurate. That test, back then in 2011, 12, sequencing was really expensive still. So he focused in on the CDR3 region, so looking at specifically immunological aspects. And there was four sequences that were 100% identical, 90% present in trauma exposed population, 0% in the control population. So we knew he had something. So I met Joe in 2018. I was still in uniform, and for me, I was probably the worst time for my PTSD journey, anxiety, depression, suicidal tendencies, and ideation. And when I met him and he presented that research to me, it was like the first time I felt kind of there was hope, right? There was something, two things that keep us from seeking help in mental health, and as professionals always say, is stigma and attribution, right? There's something wrong with me, and there's something that I should have done. I should have been stronger. I should have been this, that, or the other. And in fact, there was this chance of pulling out a biological or physiological underpinning behind it. It removes those. And so you asked how my degree helped. What we're doing. We're breaking a long-standing paradigm that is deeply rooted in emotional preconception. Trauma. Trauma means something to everybody else. People, downplay their trauma, and they think that it doesn't apply to them. 82% of PTSD in the United States is non-veteran related. 66% is women. It's a problem for all of us, but we've built this framework that we're actually trying to completely break that paradigm. And so, my depth in the research and the deep mechanistic science of what we're doing is, it's not that deep, and that's not my role. We've got a great scientific team on board to do all that, but for me, I found, it's just absolutely critical to, understand and see the potential for application, that translational science, and to build a business strategy around it. And, our stakeholders are all over the map, right? So from investors to politicians and doctors and therapists and to the general public, and to be able to communicate that science, to each one of those different audiences. I think that's where my degree came in. I was never going to be, a rheumatologist, treating patients. That was never my destiny. But I think the opportunity to understand the science at a deep enough level that I can help translate it is where that degree came in. And at the time, I shook my head all the time, like, what am I doing here? But looking back today, it's hard to deny that was a really pivotal, formative time for the opportunities I have with this company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it um it is always interesting to hear people's journey, and where it ties back to the education as well. Can you describe a little bit more about the mission and the main objectives of iXpressGenes and how you're leveraging the RNA biomarker technologies to revolutionize healthcare?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, we kind of start with the model, and because of our origin story, we're starting with what we call trauma-induced disease. PTSD, is a framework and a diagnosis, but really, we refer to as trauma-induced disease because there's all this comorbid disease along with trauma, right? So, folks with PTSD diagnosis are multiple times more likely to have MS if you're a female, ALS if you're a male, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, cardiac disease. All these comorbid diseases, they're not unrelated, right? So we refer to it internally as trauma induced disease. So we kind of just describe the model because that's kind of where it all comes from. Is essentially, we develop an autoimmune disorder against the resolving proteins in our stress hormone cascade. And kind of the immunology and how the immune repertoire is built as a baby. We resolve stress by releasing oxytocin, not glucocorticoids, and the resolving proteins around that. So it kind of makes sense that as we're adults, we were never meant to be in sympathetic nervous system engagement for long periods of time and having that chronic stress. So it makes sense that you create an immune response. So that immune response creates inflammation, and the longer you're in that state of stress and resolution, inflammation creates oxidative stress, floods the body, and it slowly builds up past the blood-brain barrier, leading to cognitive dysfunction, neurovascular decoupling, and when the brain is flooded with all that oxidative stress and neuroinflammation, it leads to what we think of as anxiety and depression, and even dopamine drop, which kind of explains why we're dopamine seeking monkeys at the end of the day, right? Most of our motivations are based off dopamine, and so it explains why people tend to self-medicate and chase alcohol and drugs and risky behaviors because we seek dopamine. So now you put all those together with anxiety and depression, and it makes sense how when we think of someone with complex, long-standing PTSD, it makes sense where that comes from. And so we've developed a 20 panel RNA an RNA panel to look at dysregulation across 20 different markers, and those markers are really kind of subsetted between inflammation and chronic stress caused by chronic stress, oxidative stress, and then compromise of the blood-brain barrier. And we also look at a couple of metabolic indicators that are pretty highly in there. So now across that model, as opposed to, kind of the paradigm right today is, well, something happens to someone, and then somewhere down the road, they need a lot of help and they're in crisis. We have an opportunity to intervene in all those years before. In fact, we can detect the inflammation before before the symptoms begin to occur, and that oxidative stress and inflammation starts to defunctionalize the brain. So we see it as an opportunity for prevention, true prevention of PTSD and trauma-induced disease, but also for management. There is a choose your own adventure landscape of modalities right now that are coming to the forefront. Everything from ibogaine and ayahuasca to stem cell to hyperbaric oxygen. There's all sorts of novel therapies, including ketamine assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin, and then the traditional cognitive behavioral therapies and exposure therapies. But right now, it's like, where do I go? Well, the issue is that there's no objective measure. We're that objective measure. So, we're starting with PTSD and we're starting with trauma because we think we can put objective numbers to this, what has truly been a subjective landscape. Um, and like, it's just where we're starting. But we see this also as just an opportunity for a whole human health platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you working on any new and innovative projects currently at iXpressGenes?
Yeah. So, you know, yeah. So yes, we've got a couple. So from the human health platform, right? Dysregulation by definition is disease, right? So, we started with trauma because that's just our origin story. But you should be able to take any disease state population and look at their dysregulation fingerprint and potentially create opportunities for prevention. Right now, we're working with the VA. Uh, uh, Cardiac fibrosis is the number one cause of death for cardiac surgery, right? It's completely undetectable until autopsy. We believe we've got a panel that we can detect that, and maybe we can become a screening tool pre-surgical screening tool, to hopefully prevent needless death from cardiac surgeries. So I think that the advent of RNA transcriptome analysis, I think we're at a time where it makes sense now. PCR machines are getting cheaper because of COVID. We have a lot more understanding and knowledge of being able to stabilize RNA, and RNA is just a really powerful tool. And so we're like just really excited to be kind of in the I think the beginning infancy of seeing this technology being moved into human health.
Very nice. How do you, whenever you look at some of the most significant challenges that you faced in developing and implementing biomarker technologies, how are you overcoming them?
Um, yeah, so I guess um, I think we're in an interesting spot where technology is severely outpaced culture.
Mm,
And we have big systems and institutions that are in place that just don't move very quickly. And so I think the way that we've kind of overcome a lot of that is really by finding the markets that are the most receptive, right? Because then we can prove it out there. So, we're starting with cash-based systems. We're starting with vulnerable populations like the Veterans Administration. We're starting with, vulnerable populations such as like foster care, folks that come out of foster care, and they're receptive because they're desperate. They're desperate for a
mhm,
solution. Suicide rates are increasing, continuously, up 40% since the year 2000, which is absolutely insane. um, you know, Mental health illness and diagnoses have doubled since the year 2000. There's a lot of folks looking for an answer to the crisis, yet we're spending 2.5 times more than any other country on healthcare. Like, we're solving the wrong problem. So what we found is actually a lot of momentum in these early adopting communities, but also in support from our federal lawmakers. They're desperate to cut budgets in that are climbing out of control in the VA and across, our health system. Like they're looking for innovative solutions, and so we found some really interesting partners that are willing to look at it in a different way. They recognize that we can't keep doing things the same way, and I think that's how we get around the institutions that are naturally going to be very slow moving. It's just by finding those advocates. I always used to say, I spent the first 10 years of my career fighting insurgencies. Now we just try to create them. So it's about finding those advocates that can really kind of push you into mass market.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it definitely is an interesting time in our history as well. I mean, the one thing that kept running through my head, overall with regards to, healthcare and healthcare costs and all this kind of stuff. Sure, I mean, you could point to, things like drug cost or the cost of equipment or the
Yeah.
infrastructure cost or whatever. I mean, I still come back to, every dollar that doesn't contribute to the actual health, though. Um, I think we should look there first. I mean, that's just sort of my personal selfish, way of looking at it. Like, you think about all the paperwork that you have to fill out for things or all the, bureaucratic things that you have to do in healthcare. I mean, those are the things that really are costing Americans and American lives. But at the same time, that's my personal view. It's not necessarily one that has to be shared, largely, but also I come at it with a lot of perspective, having worked in this environment for a while, and I see all the hard work that's going on, and you have to buy equipment, you have to invest in R&D and all that kind of stuff, and killing those things only is going to hurt us in the end. That's not going to help. So now figure out how do you still feed R&D? How do you still let people get the stuff that they need so that they can do the work that they do? But at the end of the day, um, the work that goes on needs to contribute to the actual positive steps being taken to deliver healthcare.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's incredibly fair. And I mean, the trend, I mean, it definitely will force small businesses like us to be much more lean and cognizant of translational medicine, right? And translational, discovery. So if it's, it definitely puts a lot of constraints on basic research, right? That doesn't have application. But I'm hoping, I'm hoping if there's any good to come out of these new constraints is that small businesses like us, we have new impetus where we're not going to be distracted by chasing new shiny things. We know we have to get to product or we don't survive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about you and some of your experiences. So what's the greatest leadership advice that you ever received?
um you know I remember it like it was yesterday. They when my after my first tour in Iraq, we were back at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and General David Petraeus was changing command, and is the whole division was on the field, in formation, and I don't generally pay attention to the speeches. There's a lot of whatever. It's just not something that motivates me. But there was something he said that I just never been able to forget, and he just somewhere in a speech he said, "Perspective by definition requires distance." And I think whenever, especially, to as from a leader, whether it's operational or strategic, and sometimes when you're trying to push hard, and especially like in the startup environment, you're driving so hard and you get so myopic, you truly have to you force yourself into a place of distance to regain perspective. And that's been something that's just served me really well with the teams too, and team dynamics, and how people interact with each other.
Yeah, I mean it definitely. I mean, what I find with some of General Petraeus's quotes is that you really have to sort of think about it in a basic sort of sense as well. I mean, it's more profound than that, but it's also like, look, if you were standing nose against a wall, it's really hard to tell like what color is this, what are the decorations on the wall, whatever.
Right.
You have no perspective. You
That's
stand
right.
20 feet away, all of a sudden you may get a little bit more perspective. Stand 100 feet away, it's going to change again. I mean, it is a very profound sort of statement in a lot of ways, but also then to apply it, in other aspects and say, well, look, if you're way too close to something, you just might not be able to see it for what it is. And so you might want to
Mm.
take a step back.
yeah, I've seen it, been able to apply it kind of both philosophically and physically. Sometimes you do need to get out of your office and or out of your lab or, out of your neighborhood or out of your town, to just think about it from another perspective, right? It's or philosophically, just like I need to look at this in a different way. So yes, I agree. It's very practical.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about what inspires you.
You know, uh, trauma is not a uplifting topic, and everything we deal with is serious, right? I mean, the human tragedy is it's really hard to sit in. And I think we're never going to eliminate trauma or chronic stress in our society. In fact, we need people to go into harm's way and do do and experience really horrible things, for the defense of our nation, or like just these rescue workers in the floods in Texas, who are having to recover the bodies of children. We need them to bring those children home, right? We need to have people exposed to the brutalities of the human experience. um, but we have an opportunity now where it doesn't have to create chronic disease. We don't have to ruin their lives over it. We can intervene in a helpful way that's focused on human performance and longevity, and it takes away the stigma and it takes away the attribution. It gives folks an opportunity. We say, we had a special operator commander say, hey, we want to do this because we want to get them better so we can put them back in harm's way. And I think that that's inspiring. We're not going to change the human experience and the tragedy that comes along with it, but man, wouldn't that be just awesome if we can use a test like this to objectively heal people in a different way, where it doesn't result in lifelong suffering. And that's honestly what makes me wake up every day.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's one of those things, right? I mean, it's interesting as a human that you can hide so much from people, right? I mean, you can't. I mean, granted, you can see scars and you can see, missing limbs and all those sort of things. It's really hard to see somebody that's struggling with, PTSD, or it's really hard to see, somebody that, has some other trauma, but yet we may see signs and sort of brush it off and try and move forward. That, like you said earlier, very, a very astute comment about are wanting to separate the physical from the mental. And in reality, they become one and the same. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What concerns you?
Yeah. You know, the data, right? The data doesn't lie. Every chronic disease is increasing in prevalence in America. Cancer is set to go from a $200 billion burden to 300 billion by 2030. um, Suicides have increased 40% since 2000, right? Like I mentioned before, and all the things are going the wrong way. And we spend a lot on we spend so much money in this country to reverse it, and none of the trends are reversing. We know more about the human body we ever had before, but the human body is not fundamentally changed. We are better at diagnosing, better at treating, but everything is going in the wrong direction. And from a Occam's razor perspective, is oftentimes the simplest solution may be the most viable. And I think we are in a period where we know the things we're doing aren't working and we're going to shift. And what concerns me is that do we have the fortitude to truly apply a new approach to a problem in a different way, and that we do it in a time that makes a difference before we lose more of our friends, and are we just cause unnecessary suffering. I mean, I'm betting my livelihood on it, but it does concern me.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. What excites you?
Um, so I said, in the pre-show conversation, I live in Huntsville, Alabama. I love it here, and Huntsville, in 1969, was responsible for building the machines and designing machines that put man on the moon. And I like to think that this town was forever responsible for changing mankind's relationship to human exploration. And we would never dream again the same. And I think, honestly, we have an opportunity to do it again with human health. And I just can't think of anything more exciting than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, John, for being on the Life Science Success podcast. I greatly appreciated our conversation, and really appreciated just diving deeper into what you're doing at iXpressGenes, and certainly wish you all the best in terms of everything that you're currently working on.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and appreciate you very much.
Happy to do it. All right.